Hello, 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 everybody. I'm so happy that you joined us on another great Money Monday that is on Sunday. And one of the reasons why we are on Sunday is for good reason. One, if we are on a different day, it's always for a good reason. That means we either have a speaker who needs a different day, but in this case, we have a speaker who's in a different country, on a different continent. And I think one of the big things is because the topic that we're talking about today is very universal. Because really, it doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter what age you are, even where you are in your overall financial journey. This is a topic that's important. So, if you don't know me, I am Rosalind Brown of Your Wealth Guidance, where we help Black women create their financial independence map and identify the tools for success so you can live life on your own terms. And this is like so intertwined. It's often a topic that isn't probably as connected to the money conversation, but it's huge. So if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you make sure you get alerts so you can come back again and again and again to get some more tools. But our speaker today is going to talk about relationships and how much relationships and money go hand in hand. And oftentimes we're trying to keep them separate. So regardless if you're a woman of means and you've made it to a certain point and you're like, I don't want to talk about money with this person, it's still important. Or if you are still building and growing as you come and connect with someone, this is really important. So Dr. Florencia, the modern woman relationship coach, is a licensed psychologist and relationship coach who specializes in helping women break free from unfulfilling dating and relationship patterns. Everybody can probably relate. Her evidence-based psychological tools and strategies empower women to create the relationships they truly desire while also pushing back against societal norms and centering their own values. This is very key. Dr. Florencia's clients feel emboldened to live an abundant life with the compatible and soul nourishing patterns. In her spare time, she enjoys globetrotting, me too, luxury reality TV, and embracing a life of ease. We all deserve a life of ease. And so, thank you so much for being with us today. Like, this topic, once again, is near and dear to my heart because so many times we separate the two, but they're like so intertwined. Tell us a little bit about like the clients that you work with, why people are coming to you, and how they like know that they need some help.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation because, like you said, it does go hand in hand. Money and relationships are intertwined. And more often than not, we want to avoid having the money conversation, which, I think is honestly fascinating. I think this conversation is incredibly important. But how I got started is essentially I am a licensed psychologist, counselor psychologist specifically, and I've worked within community settings over the last 7 years. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's manifestation or I don't know. I just had a pattern of clientele that I was attracting in my practice, and specifically was young women of marginalized backgrounds who were experiencing a wide range, of difficulties in their lives. And I found that quite interesting. And as I was working with my clients, what came to the fore more often was relational difficulties, relational trauma, attachment difficulties. So that kept coming up over the years. So I thought, you know what, this is clearly my lane for whatever reason it may be. I am attracting these kind of phenomena that to work through. So that is how I came to start my coaching business and my therapy business, and that's where I am now today. So a lot of my clients currently that I work with are millennial women. They are high achieving women, modern women, as I would like to call them, and they often struggle with managing perhaps cultural expectations, perhaps desires that aren't necessarily within what is considered social norms. Okay, so yeah, that is essentially what I do, what I offer.
I love that because, and I love when you talked about like social norms, and we chatted a
Mm,
little bit about this even before we started the show today, is because oftentimes women are getting feedback in terms of how we're supposed to act and show up in these relationships from
mm,
women of previous generations where things may have been very different in terms of the capabilities, the, restrictions and so forth. How do you battle those two, or how do you kind of work through both dynamics of, okay, I'm getting advice that probably doesn't apply to me anymore?
mm. Yeah, what is really interesting is that we have to put advice into context, right? Like we're living in a world that is digital, we've got access to everything. Like we've got access to, for example, right now, if we didn't have the internet or we didn't have a phone or access to computers or laptops, we wouldn't have been able to even connect, right? We wouldn't have known that, we existed essentially because we
Mhm.
live in two parts of the world, right? So we are like, there is an evolution, right, that has happened, and people still have to catch on to that, and that is okay. So when you do, or when you are confronted with advice or pushback or whatever, you always have to put into the back of your mind that perhaps that advice or that feedback is coming from a very particular lens that may not necessarily apply to you, and may be well intended, because also, a lot of time it is well intended, right? um but you can take what you need and discard what doesn't necessarily apply to you. And also, just to kind of like add to that as well, is what is really important, what people sometimes also forget, is that sometimes people offer advice or feedback based off of their own fears as well, right?
Mhm.
So again, people tend to project what they find uncomfortable or unmanageable onto the other. So yeah, so again, take what you need and discard of what isn't very helpful for you.
And I think that's a really good point because you're getting advice even as like little girls in terms of what to look for, what kind of man to look for, what kind of mate overall to look for, what they should be doing, and those kind of things. And you're like, well, maybe, I don't want somebody that necessarily will do this or won't do that or whatever it might be. But
Mhm.
there's going to be two different groups or segments of folks who are watching. So there's a segment of people who are like, okay, I'm ready to find a romantic partner. What are some of the steps or things to look for when you're out there and you're looking and you're dating to make sure that you are right there in line in terms of goals, desires, support, those kind of things?
Okay, that's a really good question, and I don't mind if I can I share a story with you if you're
Yeah,
in
of
it? Yeah, is that
course.
all right? Yeah, okay. So in my own experience, I found myself in a kind of revolving cycle or revolving door in terms of the kind of partners that I was attracting, and I got really frustrated with that, and I got to a point where I thought, well, there must be something innately wrong with me. There must be something that I'm doing. There must be something that I'm attracting. There must be something written on my forehead that is attracting these these men, right? But of course, that is irrational. But that felt really real to me at that time, and I went into therapy, and then through therapy, and this was a lengthy period, so it was, for 4 years straight of different therapists trying to figure out what was going on with me. And essentially what I came to understand was I was seeking my mother, which I have a very tumultuous, very unhealthy relationship with, and always had. I always have, um, in my partners, and I wasn't conscious of that. And by having therapy and going through that process of self discovery, looking at what is it that I value in life, how do I perceive myself, like what image do I have of myself, what and also what are some of my experiences and how have they influenced my present, and how have they influenced my lens in the way in which I view the world. Having all of that understanding, that then enable me to have a sense of power and a sense of guidance in terms of finding the partner that is best suited for me. So it was a very lengthy process, but it was a very necessary process, because if I hadn't gone through that, I most likely would have still kept on going round in this revolving door. So I say all of that to say, having that knowledge enables you to think about what it is that I value at the core. Because there's a difference between what it is that you find important and what it is that you are attracted to. It's the shiny object that you are attracted to, right? But if you do not dig deeper and find out, okay, well, do your values match? That is where the real work starts. I mean, the shiny object syndrome and everything else, that is very fun and very exciting, but the real work of actually finding your true partner that is aligned with you is looking at the core and looking at, are you compatible values wise?
Oh,
I
I
hope
think
that answers your
that's
question.
no, and I think that's because people know what they're attracted to. Like, you start saying, what type of mate do you want? And it
Mm,
might be, someone who's fun, someone who's funny, someone who is serious, maybe someone who is a professional, maybe this tall, this wide, whatever it is.
the laundry list, right?
Yes.
Yes.
But how do you distinguish between the two? Because I'm sure depending on who it is here, they're probably like, I don't know if I thought about like, I can tell you what I'm looking for. So if I, send you out in the world to find my match, I can send you out in the world, but do I know how to convey my values? Like
Mm,
how do you share those or distinguish between the two?
sure, absolutely. So again, tying into the earlier into my story, what I found was, for instance, I'm really naturally just attracted to pretty men who are well groomed, has got swagger, and
Well,
they
good.
got the nice things. Yeah, yeah, all of that very kind of like superficial stuff, really. But I just can't help it. I'm just naturally just drawn to that, right? But essentially, what that led me to is attracting a type of man that is very alpha, very dominant a lot of the time, because again, I'm seeking my mother, right? So a very dominant personality, sometimes impatient, not as compassionate, and the list goes on. And again, because I didn't have the awareness before, I was thinking, well, okay, let me try and fix it. I will, let me just be patient and try to like mold him into what I need him to be. But
Mhm.
but of course that that doesn't work. That always is that will backfire very quickly. But I didn't realize that at the time. So now with the knowledge that I have, I was able to just use my discernment and essentially pick a guy that may not necessarily physically, so superficially, may not necessarily be the type of man that I would automatically be attracted to or gravitate towards. But what I placed an emphasis on, or what I prioritized, was at the core, where is it that we meet? Where is it that we're on the same line? Do you care about certain political issues, for instance? Do you care about certain social causes? Do you care about where you see yourself in the next 5 years, and in your career, and what does that look like? Do you care? Are you a family person? Do you have a good relationship with your family? you know and how do you communicate? Are you a good communicator? Are you patient? Are you kind? Are you loving? So all of those different things that I didn't necessarily place as much of an emphasis on before, I place an emphasis on now. And again, having a list essentially of, well, what is it that really I would say fill my cup, essentially. That is what then guides me into dating or men and men that I meet. So yeah.
And I think so. There's one thing when you're looking. So if you're in the looking process, you can say, okay, from now on, I'm gonna, not just look for the pretty boy, but I'm gonna look
Yeah,
for this, this, and this.
yeah,
But what if you're already in a relationship and you're like, I don't know, like maybe I didn't do all the due diligence I should have done in the beginning.
yes.
Should you be at a point where you're like, I'm trying to change them, or is there a way to communicate and try and figure out these are the steps before you walk away?
I would say remain curious, and you know what? When actually, I've got a really good story for a client that I had, and it's not a very long story, so I won't drag this on for too long. But it's a very great example, right? I had a client who was due to get married, like in like 4 months down the line, right at the time when we started working together. And initially, she came to me because not even necessarily related to anything to do with her relationship. It was more so life, her mental health, and she felt she was quite in an awful stage in her life at that time. Now, as we started the process and started to uncover things about herself, her started to learn about herself and unlearn certain things, she then started to zoom into her relationship and the state of her relationship. And she then one day told me, well, actually, I'm not quite sure whether he's the right guy for me, but we are due to be married in a couple of months. So like what do I do what do I do? And I said, well, what makes you think that he is in the right guy for you? Like what's going on? And then she was just going through different ways that he has betrayed her in certain ways, and the different ways that she feels around him, but she couldn't also quite pinpoint exactly like what kind of like broke the camel's back in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
But we just started to just be curious, explore, and continue exploring, and like in the matter of yeah, I would say 6 to 8 weeks, he said he's not the one. I'm not going to go ahead and marry him. I'm going to call it
Oh,
quits.
wow.
And it's a matter of such a short
Congratulations.
time, but right, yeah. But I mean, it's incredible, right? And when we reflected on why we got to where we got to, she basically had experienced such violent and unsafe relationships prior, that when she met the guy that the guy at that time that she was due to marry, he wasn't violent or aggressive with her, but he was emotionally manipulative. He wasn't very validating. He didn't hold space for her. And she felt like she had to tread on eggshells in order
Mm.
to appease him, and he was prioritizing other things over her. So all of these things were playing out over the years, but she didn't really pay too much mind to that because he wasn't violent, he wasn't aggressive. So that is kind of highlighting how important it is to have dialogue with yourself and to always keep your eyes open for, I wouldn't even say necessarily say red flags, but be in connection with your body, because your body knows when something is off. And the better you have a relationship with yourself, the more easier it becomes to point out when something is truly off or there is a red flag, and that actually you need to have a conversation about what it is that you feel like shouldn't be happening, and keep having those conversations. And if you feel like you're gridlocked, and if you feel like actually we are beyond the point of trying to like find a resolution or trying to find a middle ground, then sometimes it may mean that you have to draw a line under it and go your separate ways. And no matter how painful it is, but I'd rather you draw a line under it and walk away
Mhm.
than persist a very unhealthy or unhappy and unfulfilling situation or relationship for you, just for the sake of it.
And that's a really good point, because I probably think that if you're searching, it's a lot easier to say, I'm going to approach every new relationship this way than
Mm,
if you're already with someone. But
mm,
I think also what happens is sometimes you enter, or not even sometimes, all the time, you enter a relationship and over time you grow, you change. And
mm,
so you may have entered a relationship in your teens or 20s. And as you've done research, and especially the ladies in our community, now they're on this financial independence journey. And before, you all were like, no, once we get it, we're going to spend it and all this. And so now you have a new philosophy in life. How do you convey a message of, hey partner, I have changed. I need
mm,
your support in a different way. How do you even convey that message?
mm. I would say start off with planting a seed. So share what your hopes and dreams are, if you haven't done that already, and make that a regular conversation. And as you've planted the seed, start watering the seed, right? Because you need it to grow. So what I mean by watering the seed is by providing evidence, show him why it's so important for you to shift, or why you've changed your mind, or why you want to take the leap on something, because people are not mind readers. I mean,
Mm.
I'm a therapist, I'm a psychologist, and I'm not a mind reader either. Like, you need to tell me what's going on. I can't pick your brain. So your partner can't do that either. So you have to be open and honest about what is going on for you, and allow him to enter into your world, in your worldview of why you feel the way that you do, or why you think the way that you do. And that is how you will embark on that journey together. But yes, it takes a little bit of time, but also just honest communication.
And you talk a lot about compatibility assessments.
Mhm.
So you might be like, but we have a lot of fun. I really enjoy being with them. They're really nice to me. And I think that was a good example. If you've had a slew of horrible relationships and you
Mhm.
finally find, and you're like, wait, but this person was actually nice. They didn't ask me to borrow money. Like some of the bare minimum type things. How do you say, okay, no, I need to sit down and do a true compatibility assessment? What does
Mhm.
that look like? Like, is it a step by step? Is it what does that look like?
Well, I mean, yeah, it is a bit. It is a kind of a process, step by step process. But where you could start off is by simply getting a notebook. I always like to take a pen, put things on paper, and just write down what is it that I find important in my life, and literally rate it between one, let's say 1 to 10. And when you look at the list and you see all of these things on that list, how much of it is reflected in your day to day, and how much of it is it reflected in your relationship? And if you notice that actually, let's say maybe 40% of what it is that you find important is reflected in your life and in your relationship, then you need to know, okay, well, yes, something may have to shift here, or it's a great conversation starter, because then you can go to your partner and say, okay, well, all of these things are important, and all of these things, I feel like I need in order to feel fulfilled in life. What is your opinion on these things? And just start to have that dialogue. Really, all you have to do is just have really difficult conversations. But what I find is that often people shy away from having difficult conversations because they don't want to seem pushy, or they don't want to seem like that they're needy, or they've got very high expectations or whatever. Well, if you are with someone and you feel like you can't trust them enough to be open and honest about what it is that you need and where you're at in your life, then you have to question that relationship, surely. you know so the more, if you want your relationship to grow, you need to build that trust, and and have conversations, because otherwise you will end up feeling stuck, or your needs are just not going to be met.
I think
So yeah.
that's, yeah. And because there's a lot of people who avoid conflict. They avoid any type of, you're not making me happy, or I said this and you didn't think about it, or whatever that might be. So for people who just naturally avoid difficult conversations, how do you get the nerve to say, okay, you never, you know, I said I don't want to have to cook every night and you still never you sit here until I get home. Like whatever it is, or you know, I said that health is important, but you still keep bringing home hamburgers every night. Like whatever it is, how do you bring up or start those conversations, especially for those that are like, I don't like to be the one to ruffle any feathers.
Mm-mm-mm. Well, I would say two things. One is don't be afraid of rejection, because at the bottom line here is that we don't want to feel rejected, right? We don't want to open up, be vulnerable, and then feel like, it was rejected, because then we then internalize that, right? So you just have to be mindful that try not to be afraid of rejection, and then that's additional work that you would need to do. But secondly, what you can start off with is with I statements. I mean, I'm sure we've all heard them before, but make it about you and your process. So say, well, I feel X, Y, and Z when this and this happens, or when I notice this and this. Can we have a conversation about that? So it's never about, well, you're not listening to me, you're bringing this home, and you're doing this and you're doing that, because then it's combative. But if you take a position of, this is what I'm observing that's happening to me, and this is how it's making me feel, and what is it that we can do together to meet in the middle,
Mm-hmm.
and go based off the assumption that that your partner is there to want to help you, and to want to uplift you, and to want to give you that nourishing that you are asking for. So yeah, so that is what I would advise.
See, I think that's a really good point, and like a really good way to like get your nerves up to say it's time for a difficult conversation.
Mm,
You know, have some uplifting words to yourself.
mm,
I think at sometimes you realize, okay, this is not the perfect match. So maybe we got together and we just both wanted to have somebody, or we were just happy that somebody wanted us, or whatever it might be. And so
mhm,
now it's time to separate. And we know from a financial perspective, if it's a marriage, that can definitely be a big financial hit. How do you keep things cordial even as you're separating from a relationship? And that could be a 20-year or 2-year relationship.
mm. Yeah, that is a sticky one, isn't it? What I would say is, I kind of view it this way, or this is how I kind of try to contextualize it to my clients, is that we go through seasons, and sometimes the season has to end, and it's not necessarily a reflection of you or the person per se. Sometimes you've gone through the season together, and you've reached your destination together, and it's time to move on. So what also really helps is not thinking that you have to go through this process alone. So involving people that you trust, or involving an impartial person that you trust, that can hold your hand and hold space for the both of you, to try and manage the difficulties that are coming up, because it is a very emotive time, right? If you do
Mhm.
decide to separate, and so it will also have an impact on your sense of self, your sense of identity, if you've been together for a really long time. So there's a lot that will come up, and you may not necessarily be able to hold space for one another as well as you would like, because of all of those emotions, right? So there is no shame in saying, well, actually, we may just need someone to help us, guide us through this process as well.
That's that's key because, and I know I've talked to a number of people. One, it's hard to find someone to help you as just a single person, and then
Mhm.
I'm sure even harder to find someone that both parties can relate to and get something from. So I
Mhm.
guess that's even a pivot in conversation in terms of, so if people are like, okay, I've identified these trends, I've identified this issue, and now I think I need some help. I need a partner. I need, you know, a you to help me get through this process. How do they even determine, okay, I need a therapist, I need someone to walk me through this process? How do you find somebody? You just can't, look on Google and the first person that says I have availability, because usually that's not necessarily the best match. How do you find a match to help you get out of this kind of reoccurring theme of what you're finding in relationships?
So if you are looking for a therapist specifically, I mean, there are directories out there. You can reach out to the therapist, directly, and yeah, to set up an initial call just to get to know them, get to know what their style is of working and whether that matches with you. And but also with a therapist or a coach or whatever it is a relationship, right? So it will require some trial and error. So you may not necessarily click or fully click with the first person that you meet, and that is okay. Again, it's not a reflection on you. It's not necessarily a reflection on the therapist. It may not just be the right fit for you, and that happens. So there is some trial and error, with that. But you have to be open to the process. I think the more open you are, the more you're able to attract or find the person that is right for you in that moment in time.
And then and this is, as you're looking at your mate, do they have to be just like you or share the same goals as you? Because sometimes people say, well, I 100% want to do this, and they don't want to. Do they need to be in line with all the things that you want?
As in like a romantic partner, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. No, of course not, because it's I ideally I would like to be with the male version of myself, but I know that is
Like, that's
that is unreasonable. No, so no, of course not. But I think what I really advise or encourage women to do is to look out for windows of um learning, curiosity. Is your partner curious? Is he open? He may not even necessarily be like, for instance, if I for example was really into astrology and crystals and all of that stuff. If my partner isn't really open to that, he doesn't really care for it, but he will listen to me, when I'm speaking to him about it. He shows curiosity. He shows that he's open to what it is that I want to teach him, perhaps. Those are really good qualities. Those are really good traits, for someone to have. So those are kind of elements that I would suggest to look out for, because that just shows that the person wants to connect to you. He wants to connect with you. He wants to be an equal partner in the relationship. He's not passive in the relationship. He wants to meet you where you're at. So yeah.
And should you have these times scheduled? I think as life goes on, and especially I know as I continue to get older, life passes so quickly. So you look up and you're like, oh my God, it's been a month and we haven't had a date, or it's been, 2 weeks and we haven't had a conversation that wasn't just a text or through passing. How do you make sure that you're consistently having that time to communicate your wants and needs?
Mm, that is a good one. I would say schedule it in. If you find it difficult, if you feel like time is passing you by and you think back, oh, actually we haven't had some quality time together for about a month. That just may mean that you genuinely have to schedule it in, so that it becomes a habit. So yeah, so if you can schedule in some quality time, schedule in a date, and when you do have that time, to be completely focused on what it is that you're doing with your partner in that time. Don't be distracted by your phone. Don't be distracted by a task or chores that or whatever it is that you need to do. Be focused on your partner and your partner alone, and bond. See, there's an opportunity to get to know each other, be playful. And yeah, so it can be incredibly beautiful moment to share, but you have to appreciate the moment for what it is and be present for it.
I
Yeah.
love that. It's so easy that just life goes and you're like, oh my God, like we haven't
Yeah.
had a moment outside of go pick this up, pick that up, do that, kid's sick, who's gonna do? And then you're like, oh, we've been together, but not together. That kind
Mm. Yeah, you have to make it a priority, right? Because otherwise, yeah, life can literally just pass you by. But if you make it a priority and say, well, no, like spending time with my partner, going on dates with my partner is important to me, and that is what nourishes our relationship. So that is, I'm making a intentional choice to make time for that and commit to that. We all got choices in life, so yeah. Yeah, so sometimes you have to be essentially strict with yourself and say, well, no, that this is what we are going to do because it is important for us. Yeah.
And then because money is often like the number one reason people get divorced, the number one reason people have issues. Heck, it could be the number one reason that people get with certain people they wouldn't ordinarily get with or stay. How do
Mm,
you incorporate or make the money conversation? And I mean, I don't know if you want to call it like money rules of a relationship. How do you have that conversation sooner than later and then make it a reoccurring where you can hold each other accountable there?
mm. I would say have the money conversation right from the get go. So, and I also say that to say, like, I obviously, as a European, I'm born and raised in Holland. Like, we are very straight talking in our culture. So we have money conversations quite early on. And it doesn't necessarily mean that I would ask my date, for instance, to see their what's in their bank account or what's in their savings account or whatever. No, that's not to that extreme, but I would say, okay, well, what is your, like, what do you enjoy spending on, for instance? How
That's a good
often?
question.
Yeah, yeah. How often does that happen? So, and what do you prioritize in terms of what you spend on, or what you do, what you enjoy doing. um just having those conversations, start to have those conversations, and as the relationship progresses, you can then look at, okay, well, what is your goal? What is your financial goal within the next year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever. And does that match with mine? And if it doesn't, can we somehow work through that? Can we have those conversations and see whether we can meet in the middle? And yeah, I don't think it should be off limits, and it's also all about how you ask those questions as well, because it is a sensitive topic for some, and some may get defensive, so you have to treat it with, yeah, what's it called? Yeah, I have to be sensible in terms of the type of language you use, and yeah, just to remain curious.
I think that's a really
Mm.
good point. I got to start using that question. What do you enjoy spending your money on? I'm like,
Yeah.
and immediately when you ask it, it's like most people can say, travel, purses, shoes, vacation, children, dog.
Mm.
Like it's not even a hard question to answer, but it also
Mm.
lets you know kind of where their values are. I know
Absolutely.
we had a speaker not too long ago, and she said, when I look at a person's budget, I can see their values. And so it's
Mm.
a great way to kind of uncover the two in terms of things that are really important. And so you're uncovering a lot of information on a person without actually asking those direct, what are your values?
Mm.
You can easily kind of see where that came from and the how and the why and so forth from there. I love that. I'm like, I like
Yeah.
that
Absolutely. And I think what I would also like to add is also, as you ask that question, you can also ask, well, why are you choosing to spend on, like, what does it mean to you? So again, tying it back into values. So for instance, if I'm meeting a guy and he says, well, yeah, I really enjoy I don't know, splurging on expensive shoes or whatever. Okay, okay, well, how often? And if it seems to be quite a regular thing, I would ask, okay, well, how come? Or what is the motivation behind that? And they may say, okay, well, yeah, it makes them feel better. And I said, well, why does that particular purchase, why does that make you feel better? And you just asking the why. Oh, how come? And then you start to paint a bigger picture beyond just, oh, well, he just likes to waste his money on expensive shoes.
I
You've
love
got a
it.
bigger picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I know it's some people, they'll buy certain things because maybe they didn't have them in their childhood, or when they saw
Absolutely.
people who had X, they were like, those people have it together, like what whatever that might mean.
Mm,
And so it's usually deeper than the initial question. So to
mm,
go, like you said, to remain curious,
absolutely.
and how much
Yeah.
of a difference that actually makes.
Mm, yes, yes, absolutely. Remaining curious, because at the end of the day, what you're trying to do here is to build a relationship. You're trying to connect, right? You want to be vulnerable, and you want your partner to feel like they can be vulnerable as well. So, having that openness, that is essential, because we're not trying to compete here. And I know, especially in this day and age with pop culture, there is a bit of a narrative being put out there where women are trying to compete with men or trying to outdo men or all of these things. And even myself, with the views that I have, I don't honestly think that most women want to compete with men. We just want to feel safe, and we just want to have certain opportunities and etc. So it's not about competing. It's about meeting each other where we're at,
Mhm.
meeting in the middle, and trying to collaborate. I think that is what it's about.
I love that because if you sit on social media all day, you're going to hear, the man versus woman debate. And
Mm,
it's like, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing, who's in charge,
right,
who makes all the decisions.
right.
But I think one thing that there is that power dynamic of who is the ultimate decision maker. And sometimes you come together with a goal. And I think for a lot of the ladies who are like, we want to be financially independent. So you want to have maybe retire early or move abroad or whatever those. And so maybe you have a mate and they say, yes, I'm on board. We're going to do that. And then, it only is a few weeks later and they're like, I'm not really doing anything." How do you have those like difficult conversations of holding each other accountable when you've set a goal or said that I will stop or start or whatever those things are, to
Mm,
say, you didn't do any of those things. You said you
mm,
wouldn't, you wouldn't buy a new pair of shoes every week. You said we were going to go to every month, and it's 10 new pair of shoes since the last 30 days. Those kind of things. Like, how do you have those difficult accountability type discussions?
mm. I think once you've mapped out what it is that you want to achieve and what your goal is and how you anticipate on getting there. Again, I'm a very visual person. I would say just have it up on the vision board somewhere so you can have something to refer back to. But not only that, when you do notice what I would then frame as resistance, so someone not actually following through with what it is that's agreed on. Again, it's a matter of conversation, because more often than not, it's not necessarily about the act of buying that purchase that you agree that that you wouldn't be making, or whatever it is. It's more often than not there is a feeling attached to it. So having conversations and talking about, well, what is it that made you make this purchase, or what is it that made you um kind of like divert away from our plans? Like what is going on for you? Let me in. Again, it's a way to connect, but also a way to understand what is going on for them that you may not necessarily be aware of. Like there's just so much going on, especially with money. Like everyone has a money story, right? And money um can be feel very heavy for some
Mhm.
people. So granted, you may have agreed on this plan or whatever it may be, but the process of it can bring up a lot for someone, and that needs unpacking, that needs working through, and that is what you should do as a team together.
Now, is that something that you need to do in the first 90 days of a dating process? Like, how do you start to have those conversations? Because it's so in line. People are spending money for a certain reason. People are
Mhm.
over savers for a certain reason, and they wouldn't, spend money for whatever reason. I think we had a question in the group a few days ago, and she talked about her mom, who was kind of a super saver, and she had like a pension here, a pension here, a pension here. She had savings. She was still doing some type of work now. And the lady was asking, how does she convince her mom to buy like a luxury handbag? Like,
Mm,
like you said, what do you like to spend your money on? That might simply just not be where you want to spend your money, but clearly there's a story behind either why she won't spend, why she's like, I'm too scared to spend an extra dollar. Even if you have the safety net of all these different income streams, how do
mm,
you uncover a person's money story so you can figure out the why behind the actions?
yes, very, very important. I would say again, very fairly early on. I wouldn't necessarily say, okay, well, ask about someone's childhood like on the first date, but like as you get to know them, and you're maybe like a few months or so down the line, and you feel quite settled with the person that you're dating, you start to have those childhood kind of conversations so that you can understand their context, right? And you can often kind of tie it into money, just like what you've just described. How someone's mother kind of viewed money and what they did with money. Like that is something that you pick up as a child, and you soak that up, and you most likely repeat that pattern yourself. So once you have those conversations and know someone's story, that then paints a picture as to what might come up for you within
Mhm.
the relationship as you progress. So also another thing is when you do kind of share those stories, you can then tie it back into the present and say, okay, well, so for example, like give them an example and then ask them how they would respond in that scenario, for instance. So very hypothetical, but again, just to kind of like see where they're at mentally, and if it's something that you think they should work on, then assess, are they open to trying
Mhm.
something new? Are they open to feedback? Are they open to learn, that all of these things again. I keep saying the same thing, but it is simply curiosity, right? Like it, and like, you need to assess whether there is room for growth. Most people, do have room for growth, but some people are just fine with how they are, and then you have to think, okay, well, am I okay with that? And if
Mhm.
you're not, then you know what to do. But if you are, then
You gotta
don't
go from there.
then
Yeah.
don't complain. Yeah. So
And
yeah.
and we had a topic we spoke about recently
Mm,
about financial abuse. And I think sometimes, depending on your personality, you may not even recognize it. So if you're a giver, a problem solver, and you're like, oh my gosh, I have more than this person, I can help. Or I just hate to hear the sob story. How can I step in and, fix this problem, fix this issue? If that is your trend or something you're recognizing in yourself, that like every time you connect with someone, it's someone who is going through. And you're like, oh my God, I can come in and I can write your resume. I can help you apply for jobs. I can do all the things. How do you get out of that cycle of solving? But then how do you even identify you've been in a situation of financial abuse and you want to move forward or move out of it?
Mm, that is, I mean, that is a whole separate conversation, I feel like. But in short, what I would say is, if you find yourself in this pattern, right, first step is always acknowledgement and being able to identify that that is what was happening, right? So that you've got some understanding of it. Now, moving forward, what I would then look at, well, why is it that I find myself in these patterns? So again, just to give an example with myself, like I said, I was attracted to a certain type of guy because they filled in, or they were essentially a replica of what felt familiar to me, right? Which were very abusive, very tumultuous, very unstable, etc., etc., etc. So we're all naturally gravitating towards what feels familiar. So if you again have that understanding of, well, this is why I position myself the way that I do, and this is why I'm attracting, this type of man or this type of person in my life, you then have, you would feel more empowered. You feel more power because then you can make a decision as to, okay, well, do I want to keep going down this path, or am I choosing something different for my life? And if I'm choosing something different for my life, what do I need to do differently? And that is
Mhm.
where the hard work starts, essentially, because you will get sucked into familiar situations, which again feels very comfortable because you're used to it. But then you have to be able to take a step back and think, oh, okay, I recognize this. Huh, what can I do differently this time around? Is this actually a person that I should be spending my time on? Just wondering. And also your body, more often than not, because that is what trauma does to people. It seeps into our DNA. It seeps into our body. So when we find ourselves in situations that are actually harmful or that are damaging to us in one way or another, our body is the first. That's the first thing that will respond.
Mhm.
So if you've got that mind body relationship, right, and you sense in your body that, ooh, something isn't quite right here, you have to listen to that and then analyze it before you then move on, because then you will know what the right choice or what the right decision is. So yeah, so it is a lot to unpack and think about and work through, but it is definitely something that is achievable. It just requires self-awareness. It requires willingness to work through it,
Mhm.
and also recovering from that kind of trauma isn't linear. So you will find yourself feeling like, oh, you might be regressing, or you might find yourself in similar situations, but that is part of the process. Painful, but it is part of the process, and you have to trust yourself that you will eventually get to a place where you're able to recognize red flags from the onset, and that you're able to step away or walk away from that when you do notice them. Just
And
take
then because that's comfort, like, your patterns are your comfort. Like you said, even though it was chaotic and tumultuous relationships, you were still seeking it out. How do you get to a point where things that are healthy in terms of relationships are also comfort, or, that point of comfort?
Yes. What I always advise my clients is treat yourself how you expect someone to treat you. Because more often than not, especially people who have gone through trauma in their life, who have had some attachment difficulties, etc., um, we tend to have a distorted view of what love, care, and
Mhm.
affection looks like. So I would then say, okay, well, think about ways that you can look after yourself better, love yourself better. What does that look like? You know, does that look like um, actually, pushing yourself back in your mind when you speak horribly about yourself? Because
Mhm.
a lot of us has got inner critics, right?
Yeah.
When you notice that, do you point it out and say, well, no, I'm not going to speak to myself this way? And have positive affirmations, read positive affirmations, or listen to positive affirmations, exposing yourself to positive, narratives about women like yourself as well, so that you've got that positive reinforcement, external reinforcement rather. um, take yourself out to nice places so that it doesn't become something that feels foreign, because you do it already. Invest time in self-care, like in terms of like your body, your nutrition, exercising. I mean, there is a whole wide, there's a whole like list of things that you could, do. But the bottom line is when you find yourselves when you find yourself dating or being in a relationship, you have to ask yourself, what does a good healthy relationship look like and feel like,
Mhm.
and replicate that in your own life. That's what I would
Mhm.
suggest.
That's a really good point. Now, for people who say, I want to work with you, I like what you said, I like your approach to things, how would one work with you?
Yes. So I've got a 6-month relationship coaching program, and it's a group program, an intimate group program for single women who resonates with, for example, with my story and the stories that I've told. And yeah, if you want to have a discovery call with me, you can book that through my website, which is drflorencia.com. And yeah, once you're on there, it will map it out for you. But if you want a quick win, I've got a freebie for your audience, and it's a part of my partner compatibility assessment, which again looks at values, what it is that you value as a person, and you can kind of assess whether the person that you're currently dating, speaking to, that you're currently in a relationship, whether they are matching up to those values, so that you've got an idea of whether you're a good match or not. And you can download that on thepowerofpause.info/workbook.
Perfect. I just dropped that in the chat too.
Okay.
So feel free to click the link sitting there in the chat. Her website, drflorencia.com, that is in the chat, and that workbook. So, definitely download the workbook today. Do some jotting and, thinking and trying to figure
Yeah.
out, okay, where am I today? And then,
Mm,
do I have the mate that's going to help me, especially to get to that next step? Because
absolutely.
money, having a good partner can help you financially, where you all are working together and encouraging each other, or it can be the financial downfall. And for people who've been through a divorce or been through some type of financial abuse, they're like, yeah, I know that now.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. No, we all need a helping hand. Sometimes you all need guidance, and that is what I'm here to offer. So
I
yeah.
love it. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. Means a
Mhm.
lot. And, hopefully you all got some good gems. I wrote down a couple of the questions to ask. I'm going to ask that one today. Like, okay, what do you enjoy spending money on? I'm taking that one with me. Maybe ask one of my
Okay,
friends.
great. Yeah.
Y'all go out with me and I'm sitting at lunch and I'm like, so tell me. Collect that data and just see
That's
what
good.
people actually think, and get to the bottom of
Mm.
their money story too. I think that in and of itself just might be a study that I do on my own. So I want to thank you for that. Any closing remarks for the ladies?
Be true to yourself. That's what I always say. You know yourself best than anyone else. So it's just a matter of listening to your intuition, listening to your gut, and just following your instincts. Really, you know best, so you have to trust yourself.
I love it. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for being with us. Thank you all for joining us again for another great Money Monday. That's not on Monday. And make sure you're once again sharing this video, sharing it with your friends, sharing the information that you learned today. And be sure to join us next week for another great Money Monday. Until then, have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much for having me.